3:30 in the morning, not a soul in sight. We sit and wait at the red light, talking about how dumb and brainwashed some of our brothers and sisters are, waiting for the light to turn green so we can go. I find that one of the challenges to being mindful as an educator is oftentimes the conventions that are in place in the world that inhibit us from doing so. That quote was from a rap album entitled Mos Def and Talib Kweli are Black Star. And in that album, they were talking about the consciousness of African Americans and these sort of gradients of consciousness that exist. But that story, or that little montage, tells the tale of education, where you have a lot of folks who are interested in transformative practice. And in fact, those that we have that are interested in transformative practice are able to be in a space where they can have this really nuanced dialogue with others like them. So imagine the people who are sitting in that car at the red light talking about how dumb and brainwashed others are. They would perceive themselves to be on a higher intellectual plane than the layperson, wouldn't they? But in reality, they are even limited by conventions that are beyond them. So when we think about mindfulness and being sort of aware of situations in the moment and how they will impact our practice, I make the argument that you can't be mindful if your mind is full. I'll repeat that. You cannot be mindful if your mind is full. Now, what do I mean by your mind being full? Is it full of information, full of knowledge that you gather, full of what you glean from the books you read? No, all that stuff is good. What I mean is that oftentimes in our life and in our work, our mind becomes so full with convention, with the rules of engagement, with proper decorum, with appropriateness, with the fact that somebody might be saying something or giving a speech or singing a song that was so amazing, but because of the rules of engagement in that space, you're forced to be demure and clap lightly, when in reality you want to stand up and shout and say yes. They were so confined by those conventions that we don't give ourselves the opportunity to really truly engage in mindfulness. When I was a kid, my mom used to drag me to church every Sunday. Sorry, Mom. And what I loved about the church visits were not her intention, which was probably to supplement the education I received or maybe didn't receive in school. But what I loved about it was just to watch people at different moments during that church service. So at certain points, there'll be a guy in a perfect suit and a woman with a beautiful hat, and they sit and they walk in and they just look wonderful. They're just dressed to the nines. And at a certain juncture during the sermon, they all of a sudden feel like they have the opportunity to move beyond the conventions. The preacher starts playing on a piano with so much more vigor. They're shouting back and forth. And at that very moment, they let go. They release. And the guy who was in that wonderful suit takes the suit jacket off and jumps and dances around. The woman who was sitting there with her hat on finally has an opportunity to be free. And when that moment is over, she goes back to how she looked like before. And I make the argument that in this world of education, what happens is that we wait for those moments, but they will never come. Why will they never come? Because people who are interested in having mindful educators who are thinking about themselves and what they bring to the classroom and the implications on the lives of students do not do well in supporting the institution. If people are invested in a dysfunction of education, do you think they would argue for us having more mindful educators? Absolutely not. Which means that the structures in place will never be there to allow you to be truly mindful. So what must we truly do? We must couple our mindfulness with what Maxine Greene calls a wide awakeness. And Maxine Greene cites Alfred Schutz when he says, a wide awakeness is reaching a consciousness in a certain plane of tension that originates from a pure attention to life and its requirements. To life and its requirements. What are the requirements for you to be an educator? If those requirements ask you to take a curriculum and read off the script, if those requirements ask you to only pay attention to standards, if those requirements ask you to not have students have the opportunity to leave the walls of the classroom and truly explore, then those requirements inhibit you from being mindful but also inhibit you from having the opportunity to create a new generation who can be mindful. So what we truly need then is wide awakeness. So the question is then, how do I know if I'm wide awake or not? And the answer is, the closest you are to convention, the deeper you are into narcolepsy. That in order to have mindfulness and to have it activated, we must fight against convention. If the classroom where you teach in looks exactly the same way as the classroom that you learned in, then you're asleep. If the standards that you follow are just replications of the standards that you followed when you were a child, you're asleep. A wide-awake educator realizes that teaching is a revolutionary act. A mindful educator realizes that in order for me to be mindful, I have to create an opportunity for the students to give me the information I need to be more effective, i.e. through reality pedagogy. So in closing, I want you to remember that what you will hear from other educators are exactly this wide awakeness. When you hear about spirituality in education, it's something that's usually not been heard, but that is an indicator of wide awakeness. When you hear about hip-hop in classrooms as an approach to teaching and learning, that is not part of the convention. That is wide awakeness. And you coupling your deepest passions that you've held deeply inside for fear of being ridiculed or not being accepted, that's what you need in order to be truly wide awake. So now I'll finally say, let's go back to the initial quote that Mos Def and Talib Kweli mentioned. And let me use that to describe what happens in most educational spaces. Thousands of educators convene at a conference, wondering and speaking about how dire the straits in education have reached, waiting for the Common Core standards and the Secretary of Education to tell them when and how to teach. Thank you.